Hi everybody, my name is Eugene from the Bread Republic. Today in this video we're going to show you a very versatile bread recipe that you can use for all sorts of different things. We have some examples here today. We made a baguette, we made what's called an epi baguette, and a round loaf. So basically this recipe can be used for all sorts of different shapes of bread, and it can also be used for pizza. Now we are using instant yeast today, or dried yeast. This is not a sourdough recipe, so if you're interested in sourdough, that's definitely something we'll get to at another time. So this recipe is 700 grams of white bread flour. We're using a stone ground flour from Eureka Mills today. If you're in South Africa, Eureka Mills, but we just recommend that it be a stone ground white flour. We've got some instant yeast, so 700 grams of flour. We've got 5 grams or half a packet of yeast. We've got 14 grams of salt, and then we have 520 grams of water. So literally, you may have heard all sorts of things on the internet about having to activate yeast, put it in sugar water, all these sorts of things, but we're going to skip all of that. It really is not necessary. Okay, so the way we're going to do this, everything is just going to go straight into the flour, and all the water straight in one go. Basically just combine the ingredients. There's no faffing about here. Don't try and be overly gentle. All we want to try and do is ensure that all the flour is incorporated, that there are no bits of dry flour in the dough, and that really is that. So this, once you're sort of used to the process, should take you no more than 5 minutes. We're not gonna knead the dough as such. We're going to use a technique called stretching and folding, and you'll notice that this dough is quite wet. It's a lot wetter than probably, if you're from South Africa, than most of the recipes you may have come across before. And it definitely, wetter doughs tend to produce better bread, so we want to really suggest that you do that. And at this stage, that is really it. We just want to combine the ingredients. 30 minutes from now, we're going to come back to this dough and we're going to perform what's called a stretch and fold. So we'll see you in a minute. So it's been about 30 minutes. To be honest, it's been a bit more with this bowl because we've been quite busy in the bakery. But what I would suggest at home is that you perform 3 of these folds at 30-minute intervals right from the start after you mixed. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to lightly flour the surface, very lightly. I don't want you to overdo it. You can see it's a really thin coating of flour. We're going to use a round scraper to just scrape the dough out of the bowl onto the surface. Okay, there's a couple ways to do it. In other videos we'll show you a few other techniques, but for now I think this will be a good way for you to actually feel what the dough feels like, and get used to, see how the texture changes every time you do a fold. There's a technique called the window pane, which is you just basically try and pull the dough apart as thinly as you can until it starts to tear. And if you do this every time, it'll give you a very good indication as to how well the gluten has been developing, and how far along you are in the process. So all we really want to do is flatten this dough out a bit. The goal is not to push any air out as such, but you are going to push some air out in the process. But we just want to flatten it out, give the gluten a nice stretch, and then fold this up basically in a letter form. So just, the 4 sides on each other. Flip it over, so this side will become a bit smoother, and underneath you have a bit of a sort of a rough area, and the smooth side then is the side that goes up in the bowl. So if you do this stretch and fold 3 times in 30-minute intervals, and then let the dough rise until it is approximately double of its original volume when you started mixing and combining the ingredients. So I appreciate that is quite generic, and I think one of the things we'd like to unpack in future videos is how do you actually know what the correct and optimal timing is for the dough. When is it over fermented, and those sorts of things. These are things that we can unpack in future. But we're going to do stretch and folds 3 times let it rise. So with in our temperature here at the moment, it's about 20 degrees room temperature. I would say that after you've done this 3 times, you would leave it for another hour, and then we're going to show you the next step. So the next step in this process is after you've done the 3 stretch and folds and let the dough rise, it's going to look more or less something like this. So you can see it's very nice and airy, nice and puffy. There's what's called the sort of poke test. If you use a little bit of flour or water and you give it a poke, it feels like I might puncture the dough if I push hard. As you can see there, it does come back. Actually, it's sticking there. It does come back, but it doesn't come back a lot. That to me is a rough indication that gives you a general idea that it's more or less ready to take to the next step. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to once again give the counter a very thin coating of flour, not a lot. I'm going to use my dough scraper. We do sell these dough scrapers if you're in South Africa at breadrepublic.co.za. And I'm going to turn the top side of this dough onto the surface. Make sure you get all the dough out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to shape this dough into a ball, and then we're going to place it inside our proving basket. Okay, we sell these proving baskets as well if you're interested. So to shape in a ball, the way I'm going to do this is basically going to start the furthest point away from me. I'm going to pull it past the middle and then push down and turn the dough. If it sticks to the table, just use your scraper to loosen it from the surface. The next piece, I'm going to again take it past the middle and then push down. Right? Turn the dough past the middle and push down. I'll carry on all the way around until I've done the last bit. Then I'm going to turn this over onto the counter to an area where there's no flour. And I'm going to use this technique where I'm just sort of drawing the dough closer to me and tucking it in underneath. So it's a very nice and tight ball. Okay, and then the final step, you could leave it on the counter like that for a couple of minutes just for the seams to seal. But make sure you put it in an area where there's no flour, otherwise the seams might not seal really well. In terms of the proving basket, we want to give this a thin coating of flour as well, maybe a little bit thicker than what I did on the counter, something like that. And then we're going to turn the dough over, so the smooth side is going to go down in the proving basket like that. So we want to leave this for about 20 to 30 minutes. You know, you can do a sort of similar poke test. You can see if I poke it now, it does come back very quickly. If you poke it and it doesn't come back at all, you've probably gone a bit far. So the truth is somewhere in the middle. But I would say, as a ballpark, as I say, room temperature about 22 degrees. I'd say about, let's say 30 minutes. Okay, so we're back after about 20 or 30 minutes. We're going to have a quick poke test. I've got to be honest, mine is probably less than I'm telling you to do it. But I'm going to bake it anyway. But I would suggest if you poke that, it needs to come back a little slower than that. So about 30 minutes resting time would be good. I'm going to turn this out now. So I'm going to turn it straight onto, we use these little Teflon baking sheets that work really well, but you can use baking paper as well. Don't use normal wax paper because that will stick to your bread. So on here, we can now what's called score the bread, which is just basically make a little cut into the bread to help the bread tear open in a predefined place. If you don't do it, the bread will rise to a certain volume, it'll sort of get stuck, and it will try and find a flaw, a weakness, and sometimes that ends up being on the sides rather than the top, and it will tear there, and it won't actually reach its maximum potential. So by giving it a cut, it ensures that it both looks pretty, but it also actually reaches maximum volume. So in this case, I mean, you could do a cut across, you know, just like that. You could do sort of a square cut, a box cut. You can do a triangle. The more cuts you make, the less dramatic they are likely to open up. So if you wanted to have a dramatic visual effect, then just do a few cuts. Cuts on the side are not really going to do much, but if you cut on the top, which is where it's going to burst up to, it's probably going to burst open quite nicely. So let's keep it simple. We'll give it a cross cut. These little blades, used to call them menorah blades, I'm not sure what they're called, but razor blades you can get in most supermarkets. And yeah, let's just give it a few more cuts for the sake of it, why not? And that's that. So we're going to load this into our oven. So at home, you want to start baking this at maximum temperature. And you want to start baking it at maximum temperature. After about 15 minutes or so, if your oven is really hot, you can drop it down to about 200 degrees. Total baking time for a loaf like that, for the recipe we've just given you, is probably about 40 minutes. We highly recommend baking the bread until it's nice and dark brown. That really gives it a lot more flavor. And it's very important that when you take it out of the oven, you let it rest for at least an hour. The larger the loaf, the more important it is to let it rest and cool down, because it's still cooking. The moisture inside the loaf is still trying to escape. So if you cut it straight away, there's a lot of steam going to come out, and you're going to think it's great, but it's going to probably be quite doughy. Hi everybody, well this is our loaf. This is what it looks like once it's baked. I would say the color is a little bit on the lighter side. I should have taken it a bit longer, but approximately 40-45 minutes in a home oven will get you to this result. And for this size of dough. But at the end of the day, this video was just to show you a sort of generic recipe that is quite versatile, that you can play around with different shapes, whether it's baguettes, epi-baguette, or in French or in France, it's, this sort of shape is called a boule. It just means a ball shape. There's all sorts of different shapes you could go. What's called a batard or a bloomer. In future we'd like to look at all sorts of different shapes, and we'll look at that. But for the time being, won't you try this recipe? Give it a go. If you have any questions, then pop it in the comments below. We'll post the exact measurements again in the comments as well, in the description, sorry. And yeah, please have a look at our Facebook page, The Bread Republic. You'll see some of the pictures of the bread we produced for sale. We also run some introduction to artisan bread workshops, sourdough bread workshops, and pizza workshops that people really enjoy. And our website at www.breadrepublic.co.za for our home baking equipment.